for coming out tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Yuchi, Shawnee, and Cherokee First Nations, on which we are organizing, exhibiting, listening, broadcasting, and learning today. My name is Michael Dickens. I am the gallery director here at Austin Peay for the new gallery, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to have these artist talks associated with the new gallery. So welcome to all of you that are here. Welcome to all of you online. I want to give a shout out to SECA, the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts, who's actually doing all the broadcasting for us today. So Janice Cruz is on the operation board, so give her a big hand, if you will. Our speakers and our gallery wouldn't be possible without the center, so it's vital to what I get to do here. So I'm very appreciative. Preserve and Protect open today in the new gallery and will run through December 10th. I'd like to thank again the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts for providing the funding for our exhibitions in the new gallery and for organizing and running this event tonight. I do want to give a special shout out and recognize artist Winnie van der Rijn, Winnie, for flying in from New York last night to join us for this evening and to see the exhibition. Your work is absolutely stunning, and I know Erika as well. Just wanted to say thank you publicly for being part of the exhibition. It's been a true pleasure getting to know you and your work. And thanks so much. Let's see here. The exhibition was curated by tonight's guest, Erika Diamond, and myself over the course of the past year and a half. We have several events planned with this exhibition. Tonight's curator talk, of course. And then tomorrow at 12:15 in the new gallery, Eric and I will give a gallery talk about the exhibition and engage in quality conversation with the audience. This Thursday and on December 2nd, the new gallery will be open until 7:30 for Clarksville's First Thursday Art Walks. And then Paul Rucker, another artist in the exhibition, will be here next Tuesday, November 9th, to give an artist lecture on his work and creative practice as part of the SECA Visiting Artist Speaker Series. It's also going to be streamed live, so go ahead and register for that if you can't make it. But it'd be great to see all your faces in here. All right, for our special guest. So German-born and the daughter of two ballet dancers, Erika Diamond is a textile-focused visual artist, curator, and educator. She received a BFA in sculpture from Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA in fiber from Virginia Commonwealth University. As a visual artist, she has exhibited nationally and internationally, and her costumes have been commissioned by the Charlotte Ballet. Her residencies include the McCall Center for the Visual Arts in North Carolina, Starworks Center for Creative Enterprise in North Carolina, the Black Iris Gallery in Virginia, ABK Weaving Center, Palette Forum, and Steam Studio at UNC Asheville in North Carolina. She received a Regional Artist Project Grant in 2015 from the Arts and Science Council of North Carolina and an adjunct faculty grant from VCU Arts to create new work using bulletproof Kevlar fabric, which is a material that she continues to work with today. So Diamond is taught at VCU in the Craft and Material Studies Department and at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design in Colorado. She spends her summers as a curator and assistant director of the CVA Galleries at Chautauqua Institution in New York. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Erika, my co-curator, my friend, a colleague. Yeah, she's going to talk about this amazing show that we put together. So give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's been truly a pleasure to work with you, Michael. I'd like to also mention that this collaboration is really the result of connections that we both found between our own work at the time that we met. Thank you to Austin Peay State University for bringing me in and hosting this exhibition in the new gallery. And also thank you to the artists, Michael Sylvan Robinson, Paul Rucker, Winnie van der Rijn, Stephanie Seguco, and Ananda Wolf for entrusting us with your beautiful work. So Preserve and Protect, the exhibition on view, positions garments as a site for political activism. It looks at the complex ways in which textiles, in particular garments, can relay the resilience of a culture. They're worn for protection, but also as a way to project one's identity. These textiles, maybe all textiles, have the power to preserve but also to rewrite cultural history. So this exhibition also continues a line of questioning that I've been following for the past few years in my own work, considering things like, how do garments tell stories? How do they connect us? How do they protect us? And who has the privilege of protection? So while my own works really act more like armor, what other powers does the garment possess? This talk is not necessarily from the perspective of a scholarly curator or co-curator, as the case may be. It's from my perspective, an artist who also curates. So I'd like to explain just a few of my influences and show you a few of my own works that deal with conceptual garments. So my earliest influence would be growing up in the dance community, the ballet community to be exact. Those are my parents on the left there in Nutcracker. Dance taught me mostly about temporality. It also taught me about the expressive qualities of the body, and for the purposes of this talk, maybe more importantly, the transformative capabilities of costume. So that's an example of me on the right, my early work in costuming as a good witch. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Nick Cave, as Nick Cave is really one of the more well-known artists who also make garments. You might recognize his sound suits, which are sculptural forms based on the scale of his body. And really this series came out of a reaction that Nick Cave was having to the Rodney King beating. So his sound suits are really intended to camouflage the body, masking and also creating a second skin that essentially conceal race, gender, class, and they force the viewer to look at the figure without judgment. Rebecca Horn is a German visual artist who's best known for her body modifications. So these body modifications, whether it's a horn or wings, or in this case, these gloves or fingers, explore the equilibrium between the body and space. They explore also ideas of touch, sensory awareness, and Horn described that wearing these gloves alters her relationship with her surroundings, allowing her to touch distant objects. So what I feel like is implicit in this work is the idea that touch makes possible sort of intimacy between our body and others. I also have some influences from the fashion industry. My favorite designer is Alexander McQueen. And McQueen is not only influenced by the natural world, but has some very interesting uses of the natural world itself. So the dress on the right is actually constructed of razor clam shells. He's also really invested in exploring and celebrating his own heritage. So you can see on the top in the middle an image of one of his tartan dresses from a long series of tartan works. So he's exploring his own Scottish heritage. He also takes a very sculptural approach to garment making. And I'm really interested in this line, this sort of blurry line between garment and sculpture. He also has a way of deftly reimagining darkness and turning it into beauty, finding beauty within darkness, pain, and sadness. And I would argue that really most of the artists in this exhibition are doing just that. So there's also everyday clothing and accessories. These are used sometimes to conceal our bodies, but they also reveal many aspects of who we are. Certain embellishments, or even colors, provide clues as to our cultural background. Uniforms mark our trades and allegiances. Shout out to the Austin Peay State governors. I would say too that at one glance, things like t-shirts and hats bear slogans, bandanas in various colors share queer secrets, and certain prints or patterns can reveal everything from our heritage to our recent travel history. So these wearable markers offer a quick glimpse into our identities and even our ideologies. Our bodies are a canvas for propaganda. I've also been very heavily influenced by Victorian hair jewelry or mourning jewelry. These beautiful displays of plaiting and braiding are actually created with the hair of a deceased loved one, and they're worn in really remembrance of their constant absence. So I see a real connection between jewelry, and clothing. Mainly, when they're not acting as protection, they actually offer an emotional comfort or emotional protection. I see them as a way to maintain our connection to others, and they both really have a way of revealing our identities, connecting us to other people. So in response, I've made work with my own hair. If you're a textile artist, it's just a rule, you have to at some point. So this piece is entitled Heirloom. It's a small weaving of strands of my own hair tied from end to end, woven into a silk work. It's about 6 by 6 inches, and I consider it really a keepsake made of cloth. So here, somewhat like Rebecca Horn, I'm interested in using touch, mainly as a way to remember and be remembered. While materiality absolutely guides my making process, discovering how a material, what it can and can't do, what it's really about, what its history is, my research, however, is really rooted in the function of textiles. So think about how clothing and blankets offer comfort and protection. Textiles reveal our histories. Things like tapestries and embroidery do that very well. They also separate and connect us, thinking specifically about uniforms, for instance. And they offer a connection to the world by being an extension of our own bodies or even a stand-in for someone else's. So textiles tell stories, right? My eggshell garments focus on the ability of wearable garments to record our interactions, our personal, physical encounters. So these pieces are created with broken eggshells that are stitched between 2 layers of sheer fabric. So think of the way that we hold on to the shirt of a lost love, tucking it away into a closet or a shoebox. We hope that this fabric retains some memory of our contact with that person in its very cloth. I believe that like our own skin, they absorb our experiences and bear scars of our encounters, almost like a comfort blanket worn threadbare from love. So this is my eggshell shirt for hugging. And in this case, the eggshell fragments are on top of a layer of silk and between a top layer of tulle. And tulle, incidentally, is used in ballet for tutus, so just always coming back. So here, the textile is again acting as a record of interaction, but I'm activating the garment by doing a hugging performance. So it records that interaction through a live imprint of that moment, because the shells then stay in that tiny pocket that I've stitched around the original shape. So it's a record, but it's also a metaphor for the threshold between ourselves, and the threshold maybe between comfort and discomfort. Our skin, like the eggshell, like a garment, could be seen as a permeable membrane, but it's also the thing that contains us and protects us from the world. Similarly, I think these garments are a way to illustrate those very tenuous barriers between us. These garments, however, act as armor that is meant to be broken. It's an illustration of the vulnerability, but also the self-preservation that we negotiate during human interaction. These works question both our need and our discomfort around closeness, the need for defense mechanisms, but also the pain they cause. As a queer female, I reconcile with that vulnerability daily. I also recognize that I have certain tools that I can use to express my gender and sexual identity. Everything from the length of my hair, the amount of makeup that I wear, to my daily wardrobe choices. Sometimes I wear my Pride slogan t-shirts, or my collared shirts and blazers. Other days I want to feel the power of my femininity in a dress. So these are all choices that I have the privilege to make, to be recognized as different or to blend in. From my own perspective, there is really a labor to both of those. Garments take on that labor with me. My current work questions: who is vulnerable? Who is protected? And who has the power to change that? Textiles are meant to offer protection, but often those with the most protection are not the most vulnerable. In an effort to preserve, but also celebrate the lives of those within my own queer community, Imminent Peril Queer Collection, as pictured here, is an ongoing series of fashionable safety vests made from bulletproof Kevlar fabric and thread. They are created in response to the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting, but they're specifically tailored and designed to protect my queer identifying friends, partner, people I admire, other artists, reflecting their individual ideas around personal safety and style. This new work is rooted in a desire to promote the safety of LGBTQ people, but it also recognizes the need for all people to feel safe while expressing their individuality. So as I move from place to place, I invite queer individuals from my life, past and present, to participate. They fill out a questionnaire, and in that questionnaire, I receive their body measurements and also answers to certain questions about their heritage, personal style, and their feelings about personal safety. And that is how I come to design for these individuals. So this project has allowed me, really, ultimately, to express gratitude for these amazing people, but also to celebrate my own queer identity. This J hoodie vest is a ballistic grade Kevlar vest, tailor-made to fit and protect Justin, who's a clinical research project manager at the Institute for Sexual and Gender Minority Health and Wellbeing in Chicago. He's one of my oldest friends, and he's truly an everyday hero. He describes himself as a jeans and hoodie type of guy, so that's what I made for him. Great. This vest is tailor-made to fit and protect Lisa, longtime friend and renowned clinical psychologist for transgender youth. She literally saves lives through the work that she does. A true inspiration. Lisa describes her style as a drag queen in disguise as a fierce cowboy. So, her vest features pearl snaps, gold piping, and a super sparkly twill weave Kevlar fabric. And I've included just a couple more examples of the variables, different styles. There's so much you can do with this fabric. And this last one that I will show you is also laser engraved. The actual Kevlar fabric is laser engraved with the run, hide, fight, active shooter instructions to create a pattern. So this particular textile exploration questions the need for personal safety to become part of our fashion vernacular. These vests are not memorials to the fallen or hypothetical. They're really meant to celebrate real, queer individuals living authentic and meaningful lives that uplift their communities and make the world a better place. The Kevlar itself is mainly a metaphor for the care and protection we mutually offer each other. Again, I share my work to underscore that my curatorial process is really an extension of my artistic practice. Like a good gift, you should get something for somebody that you wish to receive for yourself. So I try to curate exhibitions that include artists I consider to be great company. The artists in Preserve and Protect make garments that are intended to reveal identity and uncover shrouded histories. The works of Michael Sylvan Robinson, Paul Rucker, Stephanie Siguco, Winnie Vanderon, and Ananda Wolf bear witness to and challenge our shared American history. They question these histories who've had the privilege of being heard, and they also ask for a more inclusive authorship of our shared history. So this notion of a shared history is alluring, but our stories are all penned by authors from different perspectives. And those authors have varying degrees of access to the stage, the pulpit, the megaphone, or perhaps more importantly, to school. Some histories have been historically muted, of course, and are only beginning to be heard by one audience. Ananda Wolf, youngest of our artists on view, is a recent graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, Mexico. Their conceptual textile work could be seen also as an extension of their jewelry practice. In either form, they use traditional and contemporary methods of craft to explore their identity, their ancestry, and connections to their lands. Wolf explains that blood history is what connects us to those who came before us and to those we've never met. Our relatives and elders share with us our culture, our language, and our unique family dynamics. So on view in Preserve and Protect are several works that are meant to represent the Indian boarding school era, as well as its effects on cultural loss and preservation on the matrilineal side of their family. And so to honor their ancestors, the dresses of Ananda Wolf tell the story of their two great-grandmothers, Mary Wolf, and who's of Ojibwe and German descent, as well as Filipino McClanny of Assiniboine descent. Mary was born on the White Earth Ojibwe Reservation around the 1890s. Her father was a German immigrant and mother was Ojibwe. The gray velvet dress on view features ornate beadwork across the chest and back. So the beauty of these details are really a stark contrast to the lasting effects of the forced assimilation that were endured during boarding school. Many, like Mary, found it difficult as a result to pass on the language and customs of their indigenous cultures out of fear for the safety of their own children. This dress is meant to represent Filipina, born in 1889, who attended the Fort Shaw Indian School. The silk exterior is constructed in a typically Victorian fashion as a recreation of her great-grandmother's boarding school uniform. The reverse side, however, is colorfully embellished in dentalium shells, which is part of the traditional Assiniboine style. So it's reversible, both the top and the skirt. And because it's entirely reversible, the garment is really a reflection of who's inside and what's resiliently passed down through their generations. It reveals parts of Filipina's heritage that she kept hidden, but also kept close and preserved, only now to be celebrated by her descendant on the quiet. So by embellishing these dresses with cultural signifiers from traditional indigenous clothing, these garments act as a way to preserve and protect Wolf's heritage. As the story goes, Filipina nearly died at school due to neglect after a burn injury. The small installation of dresses is meant to honor the many young indigenous lives that were lost during the boarding school era. They've been left blank to show how these children were stripped of their cultural identities. The objective of these boarding schools, of course, was not just to remove the Native American from their home, but to force the child's assimilation by erasing cultural connections like their language, dress, and hair. Garments, as uniforms, also have the ability to reveal our social networks and signal our allegiances. They connect us to each other while separating us from other people. They simultaneously then offer belonging for some, alienation from others. One of the most destructive examples of this power of the cloth are the white hooded clan robes worn since the 1860s by the white supremacist terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan, worn both as a method of intimidation, but also as a way to evade accountability. Artist Paul Rucker subverts the power of this symbol, reclaiming the 1920s design of that robe through the use of different fabrics, camouflage, polka dots, spandex, and panty cloth. We have on view 5 of these 80 clan robes from Paul Rucker's series, Storm the Time of Shelter. I believe the power to change the meaning of this symbol resides within the skillful act of fabrication by the hands of Rucker, who is a Black artist, as well as his willingness to bring the subject to light. The wide range of fabrics within the whole series is really meant to illustrate this ever-shifting and persistent presence of systemic racism. It calls to mind also repeating patterns of history. Rucker aims to take away the power of this symbol while pointing to also the normalization of systemic racism. The camouflage fabric in particular points to this stealth aspect of racism. Often on view with this collection of robes are historical texts and artifacts, which are from his own very big personal collection of these artifacts. They are meant to help address at least the origin, organization, and ideology of the clan. He's also created a newspaper comprehensive newspaper that provides further historical background and also context to these artifacts and the overall project. And we do have some of those newspapers in the gallery for you to take. And so I'd like to just note that for this exhibition in particular, we really encourage you to interact with these educational materials, to read the statements, to follow the QR codes, read the newspaper that's provided, because these works are powerful, but they exist within a larger context, and they are meant to be understood, not to confuse. Paul Rucker is a multimedia visual artist, as well as a composer and musician. Rucker has been using his own brand of art making as a social practice to illuminate the legacy of enslavement in America, as well as its relationship to current socio-political movements. He investigates community impacts, human rights issues, historical research, and basic human emotions, which you will feel when you enter the room. Rucker is an IQ Arts Research Fellow and Assistant Professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Great symbolism is woven into the recognizable forms of our garment history. Winnie van der Rijn strips, unweaves, dyes, and in other ways dismantles the mundane collared shirts that are meant to represent the American patriarchy. She is, quote, interested in finding vestiges of power in menswear, extracting it and reimagining, reforming, and redistributing it. So like Rucker, van der Rijn is trying to envision a balance of power. She's indulging her desire to dismantle the patriarchy and then redistribute that power. Her series, How to Dismantle the Patriarchy, with nearly 100 shirts, is comprised of a seemingly endless exercise and the sort of perseverance it takes to do just that. Her interventions upon menswear are both gestural and methodical, subtle and audacious. It's as if to suggest that all methods of resistance are welcome in the revolution. It's hard to shoot at a moving target, and van der Rijn's methods remain agile. Shredding here, dissolving there, reinforcing the message while undermining the fabric, the very fabric of that collared shirt. Van der Rijn's embellishments are acts of defiance against these shirts, their happenings recorded by the threads that are left in the wake. Van der Rijn views menswear as symbolic of power, and she asks if the power resides within the wearer or the cloth, suggesting if power dynamics and relationships are constructed, then can't they be deconstructed? Another detail of note, which we actually talked about today, are the small number tags that are safety pinned to the inside of the collar of the shirts. For me, this reminds me of the dry cleaning process. And while we weren't sure when we received the works if this was just a method of cataloging the work, we should leave them on, if we should take them off, I really liked that suggestion that reminds us that these shirts typically go to the dry cleaner, which implies that someone else does the cleaning and the maintenance of this garment. So this subversion of power is so interconnected between all of the works. And I just included an image of Winnie's work as well as the others, taken from the perspective of Rucker's clan wolves. I encourage you to stand where one body of work is and scan the room and see how your feelings change. Winnie van der Rijn graduated from the University of California, Berkeley with a BA in sociology. She recently completed a residency at Textile Art Center in Brooklyn, New York, and is currently based in New York City. Her art practice includes textiles, sculpture, collage, and collaboration, which she views as her own art form. So with a wide array of material skills under her belt, she's wildly curious about how things are made, but also how they are unmade. Please look out for her limited edition print that is made in a new collaboration with the printmaking studio here at APSU. And Winnie happens to be here next, so we look forward to talking to you after this lecture. So clothing was initially meant to function to aid in our survival. A thicker skin against the perils of life on Earth. It separates us from the elements and other dangers. But perhaps our greatest threats are the weapons of oppression forged by people. These artists implicate the garment as a representation of multi-layered systems of oppression. But what we find beneath the folds is the hardened result of cultural survival. Textiles are meant to comfort and protect our bodies, but when the body fails to be protected, the garment can also be a vehicle for commemoration and healing, emotional healing. So using a language of labor-intensive stitching, overworking, and embellished queer symbolism, the work of Michael Sullivan Robinson asks us to care for each other. His work, In Remembrance, We Honor the Lives of Those Lost in 2020 to Gun Violence, does so by memorializing a small representation of the people we've lost to gun violence in 2020 in the United States. And he does so through the loving hand embroidery of their names on this coat. Sullivan has also worn this coat during protests and memorial vigils that he attends with the activist group Gays Against Guns, which you can learn more about in the exhibition. Citing upwards of 34,000 gun-related deaths in this country during 2021, Sullivan pleads with us in both thread and action to stop the cycle. With multiple layers of fabric and embellishments, composting our fears and committing to action, it's a piece with two conjoined codes, and it provides messages of hope and encouragement, as well as a listing of fears, doubts. This piece then implies that the healing or change is a two-part process. First, to acknowledge and then to take action. It inspires the viewer to release pain and choose a brighter path, to acknowledge our fears and our losses, but to reconnect with ourselves and each other. I do encourage you to take a closer look to this very sparkly garment. As an active member of Gays Against Guns, Sullivan does the real work needed for change by protesting gun violence and also publicly honoring the people who've been victimized. Originally a costume designer and a performance artist, Michael Sullivan Robinson is a queer fiber artist, activist, and leader in arts education. He earned an MFA in interdisciplinary arts from Goddard College and a BA from Bennington College. He's currently head of the arts at Poly Prep School in Brooklyn. I love this. Collectively, these disembodied forms remind us of really the vastly different experiences of people in this country. They question notions of sovereignty, authenticity, safety, and also representation. They ask whose stories have had the privilege of being accepted and widely distributed. As if history were a sort of adaptable representation of what really happened, Stephanie Siguko uses chroma key green backdrop fabric, which is more commonly known as green screen in her multimedia works. In The Visible Invisible, which we have on view, she uses this fabric to recreate women's dresses. And these are meant to represent specific eras from commonly understood eras, moments in US history. So the Plymouth Pilgrim, antebellum South, and the colonial revolution are all represented. However, these garments are not exactly historically accurate, as she used historically inspired costume patterns, which I think is important to note. So this work suggests that we might superimpose our own interpretations or personal understandings of history upon these very passive garments. She's questioning the accuracy of these historical narratives. In the film industry, chroma key green is a color that you're not meant to see, so it's easy to superimpose upon it. Some of you might miss this reference, but Scarlett O'Hara, the iconic Southern Belle character from the movie Gone with the Wind, which is really a romanticized depiction of the antebellum South. But what's important here is what you cannot see, or who you cannot see, which is the stories of the lives that surround this privileged character in her colonized setting. And the styles of these dresses are so familiar to many of us, we barely think to question what they imply about womanhood, Western expansion, breathe-in righteousness. Stephanie Sibuko works in photography, sculpture, installation. She combines the handmade with the craft-inspired mediums with digital editing and archive excavations. So she combines history and technology. She's highlighting how media, often legal media, and image-based processes are implicated in the construction of racialized exclusionary narratives of history and citizenship. Born in the Philippines, she is an associate professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and resides in Oakland, California. So through these somewhat recognizable structures in historical fashion and strategic embellishments, the textiles in this exhibition serve to recontextualize and also assert shrouded histories. They affirm the value of lives lost due to persistent ideals of colonialism, bigotry, and unequal power structures. They reveal concurrent histories and they ask for better futures. They also show that garments have the power to express and reclaim our personal and cultural histories. This exhibition purposefully makes room for the stories and cultures of people of color, women, and queer folks who reject the historical violence of a white, heteronormative patriarchy, and they celebrate their own power and narratives. These garments are history books, adding new chapters. They are acts of resistance. They are an army of truth. And I'd like to close with a quote by Judith Butler, contemporary philosopher, from one of her lectures called "Why Preserve the Life of the Other?" She states that by protecting the vulnerable with the paternalistic power that institutions already have, society would prevent loss of life. If a group is called vulnerable, then it has a claim to protection. So I ask, will we, as individuals and institutions, take up this call to arms and begin to protect each other, to listen to each other's stories, and to share our abundance of resources? So now I would like to invite any questions, and I'm also happy to talk more with Michael about the curatorial process, but I'd like to thank you for your time and for being here.
So yeah, we could open it up to questions. I've got the microphone here, so just kind of hold it. If you have a question, I will run to you so our people online can actually hear your question. So if you have a question, just feel free to raise your hand. And if any of those of you online have questions too, feel free.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
My question is, are there any cultural influences from other countries combined into a single garment?
You know, I think we were, well, I guess the perspectives that I'm seeing in common are more from, I guess, somewhat recent, so like colonized American history, North American history. So that's a good question. I mean, I think, it's like, how do you limit? We went from textile exhibition to garment exhibition to political garment exhibition, and then sort of found this common thread of like what people are saying about American history. So, I mean, American history is really influenced by so many cultures, right? Now I'm thinking of something that's like an expanded version of this, I mean, it's hard with, just 5 artists to really express the multitude of cultures that are here now. That's a great question. Michael, I don't know. Feedback on that?
I mean, if you're talking about this particular exhibition, like Erika said, like sticking with 5 artists, we're mostly looking at like United States, kind of American history, and those artists that weren't telling a history from this straight white male narrative that is so common pulled in our history books.
Yeah.
So we're looking at other artists that weren't that. These are the five that we chose that really had a good conversation going on with each other.
Yeah. I would say though, maybe Stephanie Sibuko's work leaves it kind of broad, because I think she's critiquing just a specific narrative, and not necessarily referencing like her own cultural background, you know. So I think in that way, it leaves the door open a little bit to say there are so many cultures that aren't part of the like widely accepted narrative. Yeah, so that's your question.
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you so much, Erika, for a wonderful talk, and also for the exhibition overview. I'm curious about the absence of body on display.
Yeah.
Because especially when you put all this work on context and the importance of all these narratives,
Yeah.
in association with the body, what happens in the exhibition when we see the garment without the presence of the body?
I think from my perspective, well, first I want to say it was a conversation with the artists too, like how do you want the work to be represented or presented? You know, are they all on dress forms that look the same? Are they, Winnie's work is on the wall, there's no figure there, they're figureless really. But I think it lets the garment do most of the talking, which to me is really an interesting thread. But I guess Paul is the only one who's he has his own mannequins that are black, that are larger than life size and meant to be. But I think without the figure, I mean, I would also say Michael Sullivan Robinson's work has been performed. So that's a case in which the body is present. So the code in particular acts maybe more as like a record. But I guess I like that too, that we have to read the textile to find out who the artist is and what they're trying to say without the body in there.
Yeah, and Stephanie's, of course, has the body, but it's feminine form, but it's nondescript face, and all distinctly white patterns, right? So, yeah, I agree with Erika. These are these conversations we've had over the past year. Bodies, no bodies, and then which dress forms do you have in there? And yeah, we really wanted to focus on the garment speaking for itself, and without a body, maybe the viewer could then put themselves in that position if they were to wear it, versus being told what it looks like from someone else. That's some of the thoughts that we had with that.
It's a great question, and I will say we did fairly intentionally show them all in a different way, which we had to figure out what was right for each one, but we did want them to not just be like you go to a fashion exhibition, and it's like these are the dress forms for this show, for instance, and so I think it allows you to not notice maybe like, oh, this is the dress form that they had access to, right? But I think leaves it open to interpretation and space for your body.
And we also display them in a way where you can actually interact with that body of work as a sole entity, as a sole body of work. You're dealing with one artist. So we gave space for that. But also when you step back, they are in conversation with each other too. But yeah, so if Winnie wanted hers on a wall, or that's how it was presented, we wanted to have that ability, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And give that experience to the viewer. And I can go back to what I just said, don't want to like impose like dress forms. Like you said, the fashion exhibition, like we want to feature the clothes, but we have all the same line of mannequins or dress forms. We just like the individualism of the artist.
Yeah.
To exist.
Yes.
Other question?
I will elaborate on what you said too about being able to view each body of work somewhat separately. And we definitely deliberated about who went where and what kind of impact we want the viewer to have first. And like, do you walk in and you see Paul Rucker's clan robes right away? That's where we started, but it's not where we ended. We really wanted people to be able to experience some of the quieter works first and read more and realize that they needed more information and dig so that they kind of prepared to do that for each of the works, to kind of find more context in the wall text. And you really can experience them individually so they don't have to be talking to each other the whole time. I mean, on the other hand, I also like that the room is quite full of these pieces, so they really create like this new gathering of people. But you can definitely take a break. You can turn around and look at Sylvan's work on its own, experience joy. You don't have to be confronted, but in order to move through the exhibition, you will be confronted at some point by all of his works. Any questions about the way the work is made, for instance? Yes.
Yeah, no, right. So you waited till I walked up to the front.
I love it, yeah. So I guess I have two questions. The first is the dumb one. You said that your clothes can actually stop a bullet, right?
Typically it's layered more, and where I'm trying to get with them is where we would be if we started to need to wear them, and we would then obviously want them to be fashionable. And so this is a way to kind of play with this fabric. I'm not going to try it, and that's been done too, so I don't have to do that. But yeah, I think mainly by discovering how much of this material is out there too, and all of its various applications, sort of like playing around with it visually too. But yeah, it's not intended to actually do it. It might help. It is still hard to cut through, just one layer of it. The ballistic grade hoodie, maybe more likely to, but the power is really in the metaphor. And your next question?
Have you and the other artists ever thought of creating some kind of artist challenge where you essentially create a bunch of garments together, make a series, but then you have a writer or have someone submit a story for each set of garments that takes place in that time period?
Oh, well, I think that's a whole new conceptual art piece. No, that was not the plan, if I'm understanding your question. There's still a month and a half to go, so yeah, no, but I like that you're asking that because it means that you're considering them in conversation, which they absolutely are, and I think that happens visually, and once you start to make those visual connections, like even just seeing the way Stephanie Siluko's work was chroma key green, I'm seeing all of the green in Paul's work and Sylvan's work, and there's something really beautiful happening there. And then I'm like, what are these two saying to each other? And what would they say if they could speak, for instance? Yeah, we should write something. That would be great. Any more questions, Michael, from?
We have a question coming in online, they're just typing it.
Oh, okay.
It's like, I have a question, but I gotta type. All right, here we go. All right, this is from Professor Ringel. Has there been a performative aspect of the eggshell clothes? This, of course, would destroy them. Do they exist only as potential?
There's only one garment that has been performed in, and that was the first eggshell shirt for hugging. The other ones are full of potential. The glove I was actually meant to perform, a handshake performance, if you will, but due to COVID, that was canceled. A lot of handshaking happening. It's actually been interesting to kind of review the work in light of that too, the need for contact, the destructive quality of contact. But in that first performance with the white eggshell shirt for hugging, I did learn that if the shells are too small, and depending on the type of body I'm coming in contact with, they're actually really resilient. They don't crack that easily. So I started to use larger pieces of shell to kind of help create that moment of impact too. So yeah, one has been activated. They are intended to be, I think, it's gotta be a special moment because then it's done. Oh, another question.
So when you did the hugging performance with the eggshell shirt, did you do a controlled hug ahead of time? Did the person change their hugging knowing that they were going to be crushing?
I'm glad you asked that question. So I did this in a room full of people that knew they were present for something, but not for what. And I had a plant who was supposed to be my last hug, just in case there were no takers. And essentially what I did, the question with performance is always like, how do you get people to engage? How do you know when it starts? How do you know when it's over? So I started by just going in for it. And people were pretty clear if they were just like, I do not want that from you. And others were like, yes, please, I need a hug. So that happened pretty naturally, and I just had to feel it out. But I did have one last person who helped get that last bit on the back, just, But what I didn't know would be so, I guess, emotionally effective too, is that the sound was really, it was deep. It's almost sounded more like bone than I expected. So you think of, if you drop eggshells on a hard surface, for instance, there's really a twinkling sound. But it was a really deep, visceral sound that I didn't expect. So you add an element and it changes everything. Yeah. Sometimes you need a plant.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So this comes from the artist aspect. So we're both visual artists, and we're both curators. So what was this experience like? I know you're a curator in a gallery that is more of a commercial gallery in a sense. So you have to rely on sales,
Yes.
and even though you challenge the viewers, you still have that in the back of your mind. What was your experience like being free of all that?
Freeing.
Free.
Yeah, there's just a really different, there's a really different set of parameters that you get to have, I think, when you're curating for a university space, for instance. I think in all exhibitions it's an opportunity to educate and to share work that has more information and deeper context to it than just a pretty picture. But I found it pretty liberating. Of course, without any parameters like that, it's also, it could be anything, it could be anyone, where do I stop? So I mean, both spaces serve a function and both are good. I mean, working within a commercial space, you support artists in a specific way, and put work into the hands of collectors. But when you don't have to think about collectors, it's easier, I think, to just make the connections between work and to invite artists to show work that they don't need to sell or have to have available for sale to, or to do, we didn't do this in this case, but they could do installation work, they could show video. So I think there's a lot of freedom that I definitely enjoyed having without those parameters, but it's just different.
And my next question is, what are are your thoughts, or how did you approach this? You briefly touched on it in your lecture as an extension of your artistic practice, right?
Yeah.
But here you are, you're not making anything, but you are making something. So what is it that you're making with this exhibition that you don't do or you can't fulfill through your artistic practice?
Great question. So I think when you make an exhibition, you're creating an experience, and you're creating a conversation that oftentimes no one's going to make unless you make. It's the same as your own artwork. Like, you're not going to make an eggshell garment. Maybe you will now, I don't know. But not for the same reasons, maybe. But it's my interests and my curiosities about the power of garments and how they tell stories that's going to lead me to choose these specific people for this exhibition. And I think there are artists like, the first time we met, we talked about Paul Rucker's work because we had an interest in just, it's just work. And so that was our starting point, right? And then I've been following Anangukwe's work because I was really moved by the way that her work is talking about the specific aspect of heritage and history that not everyone can talk about. I'm not going to make work about really the topics that Paul makes work about. I'm not going to make work about Indian boarding schools, or I might make work about the future. So it allows me to offer a platform for others to say the things that I can't speak to, even though I'm interested in what they're doing. And sometimes they're just doing it better, or they have a perspective that I just can't offer. But I still feel like it's important. So I think it's really a gift to be able to see this work together as like the fruits of our labor. We didn't have to make the work, nor should we have. It would have been different. But yeah, I feel like it's a project. Just like any other part of your studio practice is a project. I just don't get to touch anything, which is also that's also not true. There's some steaming happening. There's some cards doing, but yeah, I find it thrilling in a different way. Because you still have to make things, so I will do that at the same time. But yeah, I don't know. Do you feel the same way as someone who does the same and also year round curating?
Yeah. I mean, the stuff I'm interested in, that I want to see this work, and so I go find it versus making it.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware that my voice has limitations. But my resources, I have a lot more resources with the gallery and with CETA funding, where I am able to have these conversations and bring in these exhibitions for the university and for the Clarksville community. Conversations I want to have.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I grew up in the Southeast, so I know what I was taught. I know now, learning more of what I wasn't taught.
Yeah.
And so using the gallery as that educational tool for the students, but also for myself. So it's always a learning opportunity for me to get to learn about all the other voices and give them space for that.
Right.
So that's how I've been using the gallery.
Yeah.
And to just hang out with really cool artists.
They're really great people.
So and it's just fun.
Yeah.
There are a lot more jobs, I guess, but this is one that just fits in with my artistic practice of just providing space for others. Yeah. Any other questions?
Is there a question?
All right, so to make a garment for someone is a deeply devotional act. That's a great statement.
Yes.
Can you tell us which of these artists sew the works themselves, one garment at a time? Do the condition of the production of these as objects affect how they mean?
I believe all of these artists have handmade the work. though it could have been a collaborative process, and I don't even know if there were like any assistants involved. So I think a lot of it was really handmade. I mean, Wendy was unmaking a lot of things, but also like a reweaving into that work. So I think that's probably something that I subconsciously also enjoyed about the work. There is something about that handmade aspect of the consideration that you have when you are really close to it and you're making those tiny decisions. Stephanie Siguko's dresses, just take a look. Like there's so many details on those dresses that they're, it's so good you don't even notice it. It's a good wedding planner. Like you don't notice that when, it means something's wrong. So, but I do think that's an important aspect of it. And Sylvan's work too, just like there is absolutely that act of devotion. So in the name, I think they all have very different aesthetics too, that really match, the style or the message. In Sylvan's statement, I think even references like it's overworked. It's just like there's so many layers. Like it's definitely not how I would work. It's such a contrast to Stephanie's pieces, even the halls, they're just clean. But there's like a joy and like a jubilance there with the method too. I think I'm gonna write that down. Part of that question is really good.
Any more questions? All right, well, first before I thank everyone for coming out, we're gonna go over to the gallery and just open it up. So if you want to go see it while we're here and let you see it while it's all fresh in your mind, so please go there. But I do want to give a big shout out to our gallery assistants who spent tons of hours. And they were there, like our gallery exhibition schedule so that we have 1 week between exhibitions. So 1 week to take down an exhibition and to put on this exhibition. And they worked countless hours. So Katie, who's here, Sarah, Jamie, Rayanne. That's a lot, right? That's 4, right? That's even more. And it was a pleasure for us to work with them and see them work and just get in and enjoy it. So I want to give a shout out to them. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. Thanks for driving up from Nashville. The exhibition again will be open through December 10th. So please stop by. If you're in the community on Zoom, come by during the first Thursday art walks. We'll be open until 7:30 for the next 2 art walks. And tomorrow at 12:15 again, Eric and I will be in the gallery, kind of having a casual conversation with whoever shows up and kind of talk more specifically about the work there. So again, thank you, thanks Sika, and y'all have a good night.